In this tutorial, we're going to look at working with real-world data in Excel. In part 1, we looked at some example data and found measures of central tendency. In this example, we're going to take a look at some data from the Chicago data portal, and we'll learn about how text is stored as data and how to import it into Excel and some of the challenges with that. So in this tutorial, I'll show you how to import text files. We'll look at some still images that show you the different menus you have to navigate to get a text file into Excel. We'll talk about transforming text files if you need to do that, but most of the time Excel's importing wizard can handle all of the common text formats that you'll find on the web. We'll run through how to create a pivot table. We'll take the data from that pivot table and make a chart. And then we can take a look at some other applications for this data that you extracted out of Excel. We'll only talk about that briefly, but those are the objectives for this lesson. What you will need for this lesson, you'll either have to have your desktop application of Excel opened up. If you're using Excel on Office 365, you'll need that. Excel 365 has its own challenges. It's not quite as robust as the desktop version, so I strongly recommend you use the desktop version during this tutorial, but I will show you how to do everything you need to do with 365 just in case you're using that version. Some of these things you might be able to do also with Google Sheets, but we're going to use Excel. You might need a text editor, but chances are, if you're using Excel 365, at least for the purpose of this tutorial, the text editor is not going to help you because we're working with very large data sets. Let's talk about importing data as text. We're going to use data from the Chicago data portal. This is the URL here. The data set we'll use is the 311 request data set, and we'll take a look at rat complaints over the past year and a quarter, give or take. And we're going to try to answer this question: what zip codes have the highest number of rat complaints in the city of Chicago? Before we can start importing data, we need to get it off of the Chicago data portal website. Let's take a look at that site now, and we can walk through their user interface and work on getting data out of their data sets. So here's the URL, data.cityofchicago.org. If you search 311 services, you will get this page right here, 311 service requests. Check the date to make sure it's the most current one. They recently migrated a whole bunch of data sets into one master data set for 311 service requests. If you're not from Chicago, 311 is the city services line that you call when you want to request a city service, although increasingly I think most of their requests come from web form submissions. And this data set has a list of all of the submissions to the 311 system for, I believe, the past just over a year now. But depending on when you watch this video, the dates may have changed. I'm going to click on View Data. That'll take you to their user interface for manipulating the data. There's far too many records to just download the whole thing and put it into Excel. Even though this is only a year or year and change maybe worth of requests. When I was looking at this earlier, I think I saw there were over 2 million rows. That's right at the threshold of what Excel can handle. Yeah, just over 2 million rows in this data set. So what we want to do is just get the requests that we're interested in. Since we're going to be doing rat complaints, let's find an instance. Wow. Let me just search here. Rodent. It's not going to do it with the browser. Let me search in the search tool. What we want to do is find the exact label like this for the type of complaint that we want to investigate. So I'm going to copy this exactly, and then I will delete my search term and go to the filter tab, and let's add a new filter condition. So we can filter out all of the requests that are not rodent complaints. We want SR type, that's the column name for the column we're interested in, and then for the operator we're going to use is, and then you can paste in the exact label that they apply, and then check this box next to the label, and it should filter out all of the requests that do not have this label under SR type. So we've got 64,835. That's a number that's very easy to manage in Excel. And what you want to do now is export this file as a CSV. Okay, everyone, sorry for the hard edit. There are a couple different things I want to show you when we're using Google Sheets that are different from Microsoft Excel. So if you want to watch the rest of the Excel video, you can do that. I'll post a link to it if you're using Excel, but we're going to focus on Google Sheets. So once you have your CSV file downloaded, comma separated values file, if you open it up in a text editor, it's going to look like this. So here's each delimiter where columns start and stop. You're going to want to import this into Google Sheets. So let's open up a new Sheets file. So one drawback you're going to notice when you're using Sheets is that it's a little slower than Microsoft Excel. But if you're patient, you can get done pretty much everything that you need to do with Sheets as well. Okay, so let's first import that data. So you want to go to File and then Import. And that will give you a place where you can upload the data you just got from the data portal. So I'm going to drag that in. Okay, it'll take a second to upload. You'll notice there's a big lag time on Google Sheets. It's more lag time than you'd expect to experience when you're using Microsoft Excel. So if you're trying to do stuff where you have a lot of data, I would probably recommend paying for Excel, especially if you're going to be doing this on a regular basis. Okay, so it'll give you a choice of where you want to put it. I'm just going to have it replace this empty sheet. I tried importing this by selecting comma, but it didn't work. For some reason, it didn't recognize the commas as delimiters. So we're going to go with detect automatically. That seems to work better than trying to specify. And it's going to ask if you want to convert stuff to numbers, etc. That's fine. We can do that. One thing I'll point out, if you have numbers that are unique identifiers in your data that look like dates, but you want to preserve them as numbers so that you don't, have to convert them back to numbers later on, select no here. Okay, let's import that. Again, it'll take a few seconds. So while that's importing, we can talk about the two things that I'm going to show you. First, we're going to try figuring out how many rat complaints are there every single day in the city of Chicago on average. So on any given day, how many rat complaints can we expect people to put through the website? The second thing we're going to talk about is, or we're going to try, is we'll do the exercise I mentioned before about putting rat complaints, sorting them by zip code, and then counting them using a pivot table. Both of these things, we'll use a pivot table to do that. And then once I'm done showing you those two procedures, then you can take a look at the rest of the original video where I map out some of the rat complaints. Okay, so this should load in just about 1 second. While we're waiting for that, I guess we can put a different title in here, or will it title it automatically for me? No, so I'm just going to call this rat complaints. Okay. So let's talk about the data that we've got. It looks like we've got a unique identifier here in this SR number. Department, street and sanitation. That's not very useful for us in terms of sorting. This status field, though, that's going to be important, right? Some of these are completed, some of them are in progress, and we probably only want to count the ones that Chicago has classified as completed. So if we want to figure out how many rat complaints each day, the first thing we're going to have to do is get the date out of this field. Here, let me make it bigger so you can see. So they stored the date field as the date plus a timestamp. We don't necessarily really want this timestamp. When we put this into a pivot table, if we were to say create a row for each date, each calendar date, this would screw it up because you have all of these different times. It's essentially going to create as many rows as you have in the sheet already, which is something like 60-some thousand. So that's not going to be useful for us. So we want to split this up. We can do it with formulas. Now, I don't think you're going to have to do anything this complicated for this course, but it doesn't hurt to learn how to do something like this because you'll find data stored this way all the time, and it's pretty frustrating. So let's put a couple columns in so we can work. I'm going to put one in to the left, and actually I'll just two because I think we're going to have two values here. So the first thing we want to do is figure out how many characters in the string or the set of alphanumeric characters we want to pull out of this field. So I'm just going to put, how about date end? And I'll use all lowercase letters since they're using all caps so that I know which columns I added. And then the second thing we want to do is actually pull out a date that we can use. So I'll call it usable date, something like that. Okay. Oops. Okay, so let's go ahead and put in those values for the formula. So I'm going to first, try to calculate the end position in terms of an integer for the number of characters that the date occupies in the string, which is just a term for a set of alphanumeric characters. So we want to count how many characters the date occupies so that we can use another formula to pull that date out of this combined date time field. So let's use the find formula to do that. We're going to search for the space character. So I'll type the space inside of quotes. And then we want to search this date value. Go ahead and close that out. Okay, this looks a little weird, but it's definitely the formatting. So let's highlight the entire range here. And then I'm going to go to format number and just select plain text. I think when you put just a number in and it's already formatted for date, it just starts counting the number of days from, I don't know, January 1st, 1900 or something like that. So the next thing that we want to look to do, well, why don't we fill this down? So let's just verify that we've got a number in all of these. Yeah, that looks right. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is actually extract the date. So we're going to use the left formula. Start typing left and then tab over. First, we want to give it the string that we want to pull characters out of, and then a comma, and then it wants to know how many characters do we want. So we're going to tell it to get us 9 characters, and let's see what happens. That looks good. Let's go ahead and fill that down. So I'll do Control-Shift down to get the whole range, and then Control-D to fill down. Okay, and while we're here, instead of having this in date format, let's change it to just plain text. So let's go to format, number, and plain text. Okay, oops. And we also actually need to copy and paste values. So I'm going to hit Control-C and I think that might lock up the browser a little bit because it's trying to copy a lot of values, 61,000 values. So Sheets takes a little bit more time. So give it a second to catch up. While we wait, I'll just point out that this is not a great way to store dates and times, right? If you had this in separate columns, you wouldn't need to do all of this processing on the data on the back end here. Oop, let's just have it wait a little bit longer. It'll get it. I've done bigger selections in Google Sheets. It'll get it. It just takes a couple seconds. So if you're ever designing a system and you're trying to store a date and a time, or a first name and a last name, sometimes it's better to have those in separate fields so that you don't have to do this kind of back-end processing. Okay, let's see. So we will go ahead and paste, but we're going to paste values. We don't want the formulas. We want the actual dates in those cells. And again, that'll take a couple seconds to do, but it looks like it's done actually. So let's just verify. Yep, looks like we've got just text dates for all of these. Okay, now what we are going to do is we're going to make the pivot table. So let's go back up to the top row, and I'm going to insert. Oh no, sorry. In Sheets, it is pivot table under data. We'll make a new sheet for this so that we're not changing the original data. So let's create that. Okay, so it'll take a second to get ready here. But now we have the rows, columns, values, and filters. These are the same four options you can change in Microsoft Excel. So it just looks a little different. The user interface looks a little different. So let's first find out on an average day in Chicago for this time period, at least, how many rat complaints are we getting? So that's where we're going to use our date field. And once we do that, we can try counting by zip code. So for rows, I'm going to add. Oops, I accidentally clicked this twice, I think. Add, and then why don't we make the rows this usable date that we have put in. Okay, now, I don't know, it kind of gives you suggestions. It's not super helpful why you would want to average the x coordinate in the latitude and longitude, so I'm going to get rid of that. Columns, remember, we want to count how many are done, so I guess we will check status for the columns, because that will tell us how many of them are completed. Okay, and then for values, we will also count status, since it should say completed in each one. Okay, and there you go. So we've got every single date in the range. It looks like we're missing some days. And you can see the data sometimes jumps around. Maybe they batch these and do a whole bunch if they get backed up on their paperwork. Let's find out on any given day in Chicago, how many rat complaints are there going to be? So I will highlight the entire range, and we've got the sum down here, but if you click on this, it'll show you a whole bunch of values. So here's the average, 172.4 if we're rounding. The lowest day in the range is 32, the highest 395. There's 58 days in the range. So there we go. We don't even need to write a formula to get that value. We can just get it right from down here. Okay, so that's one calculation that I wanted to show you. Let's go ahead and clear these out, and we'll go by zip code. Okay, so let's go back to the data, actually. So let's see what we've got here. I think we probably still want to count this status value. That'll help us get only the completed results from this data set. We don't want anything that's in progress. And then let's see, do we have a zip code field? Yep, right here. So we can go ahead and use the same or a similar procedure. So for the rows, we want zip codes. So that'll get every single zip code from the data set. It looks like there's 58, 57, something like that. Okay, and then for the columns, we can do the same thing. We'll just check to make sure that the status is completed. It looks like we only have completed requests here, though, so that's not an issue, but be aware, sometimes when you get data sets, especially municipal data sets, where it's user-generated requests, they'll track the ones that are in progress as well. And then for values, we can just count completed again, or status again. Okay, so here we go. All the rat complaints by zip code. So now looks like we've got an empty field, so we can ignore that one since we don't have any information. If we were trying to be super accurate, we would make a footnote and say there were 33 complaints that didn't have any assigned zip code. Let's copy the rest of these out of the pivot table, though, because we don't want to work with data while it's in the pivot table. So we can copy, and then let's get a new sheet. And I'll go down one so that we have enough room for header rows. Okay, so we'll put in zip code. And here, since you might be using these in a graphic, you would type them as you want them to appear so that hopefully Sheets is going to put it in for us. And then let's bold this row since that's headings. Okay. And now we can sort it. So let's go ahead and get these columns. We will go to data, and then let's go to sort range by column. No, we want to sort by column B. Oh, let's check this. There we go, by complaints. And then I think this is ascending order, so we want, I think, descending order here. Okay, so here we've got 752 at 60623, and so on and so forth. And we could, easily, if we wanted to show, say, the top 10, we could put in a chart. I'll probably get all the details. Nope. Well, spoke too soon, didn't I? Probably a combo chart. No, I want just a regular old bar chart here. Here we go. There we go. That's not the best title. We'd change that to top 10 components by zip code or something like that. Okay. That's pretty good. We could maybe, well, no, I think the scale is correct for the numerical axis, so I think we have nothing left to do for this one. So those are two different ways you can use a pivot table to count data. There's obviously many more applications, but this is a good start, and it'll definitely help you finish the problem that you have on this. I'm going to rejoin the other video here so that you can see how to map this out using a Google custom map, because it's not very useful. If you don't live in that zip code, you're not really going to have a good sense of what this data means. So I will go ahead and edit in the rest of that older video, and you can watch how to put this into Google Maps. Now, since this is geographic data, I realize this isn't a very satisfying display, because all you have is the zip code, which means a lot if that's your zip code, but doesn't really show you where in the city the complaints are. So to address that, I made a very simple map using Google Custom Maps. All I really did was save this data in Excel, the zip code and the number of rat complaints, as a CSV, and then I dropped it into this map. And you can click on the map and it'll give you the number of rat complaints. There's the biggest one. You can see when you zoom in on the map. It's down by Midway Airport. I don't know what the significance of that is, but this is what you might do with data where you have location information and you want to display it visually. And luckily with custom maps you can feed it a zip code and it'll put a pin in that zip code for you. So just looking back at the objectives for this lesson, we talked about how data is stored as text. We talked about importing it into Excel. Again, I must recommend that you use the desktop version of Excel, as the Office 365 version has severe limitations. We talked about making a pivot table. Again, just think about what you want the row labels to be, what you want the column labels to be, and what type of data you want to count. Those are the 3 questions to ask yourself when you're making a pivot table. And then we made a very rudimentary visualization. You'd obviously take the time, if you were submitting this for class or for your job, to have all the components of a well-formed visualization in there. And then we talked very briefly about other applications you can use with the data. And that is the end of this tutorial.